Welcome to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode we're going to be talking about challenging nuclear power. Remember the meltdown in Fukushima, Japan in March of 2011? 1 month later, there was a demonstration at the Ameren stockholders meeting. Let's take a look at what happened during that demonstration.
Sustainable energy now! Sustainable energy now!
We're out here because Ameren's trying to rip off all their utility customers. They want to charge us in advance for a plant that they're going to be building 20 years down the road. And quite frankly, myself nor any of these other people out here really want to pay for that. We pay our bills, you pay yours. We pay our bills, you pay yours.
We pay our bills, you pay yours.
Because we think it's fundamentally wrong to be charged money on our electric bills for a service we're not being provided. And that's what Ameren wants to do by making us pay for an early site permit to pursue nuclear power. Nuclear power is one of the most cost-intensive means of energy generation there is in the world. It makes no economic sense to even build a nuclear reactor, let alone store waste for 2 million years. Right now in Chernobyl, we're coming up on the 25th anniversary of Chernobyl next week, April 26th. They're literally putting a giant dome around the site of the nuclear reactor. They have second giant dome. They have not finished cleaning up that site from that disaster. They're still spending $1.8 billion on cleanup. And we're going to have an Earth scattered with domes around it to clean up for the mess that we're making by using nuclear power. Nuclear construction is nuclear destruction.
Nuclear construction
Is nuclear destruction. Nuclear construction.
is nuclear destruction. Nuclear construction is nuclear destruction.
We're here protesting this nuclear reactor being built because, for me, it's more so about the environmental issues than about the economic issues, but obviously the economic issues are vast and need to be talked about, and people aren't really seeking out that information, and so I think we're here to just spread that education a little bit and, really question what's going on with nuclear power. More so for me environmentally, because it's not a renewable energy source and we need to be investing our money in things that are going to promote green and sustainable energy for the future, because that's our only chance of saving the earth.
Sustainable energy now! Sustainable energy now!
Nuclear power is one of the most dirty, dangerous, and expensive power sources in the world, and we think that if no Wall Street investment firm is willing to invest in this kind of energy, that the people of Missouri shouldn't either. We need to become more efficient. We need to transition to renewable energy sources like the sun and the wind. Right now, Missouri is 43rd in the country for energy efficiency, and it's unconscionable that we're going to try to have the Missouri ratepayers fund a new nuclear plant in this environment.
Ameren bailout?
No thanks!
Corporate welfare?
No thanks!
Ameren bailout?
No thanks!
Corporate welfare?
No thanks!
Welcome back to Green Time. I'm host Don Fitz. This episode, we're talking about challenging nuclear power. I have with me a guest who has been an icon of the anti-nuclear movement in St. Louis for how many years?
Well, I made my first speech the day Karen Silkwood was run off the road in 1974.
So that's 37 years.
It's a long time.
And it's Kay Drey, in case you don't recognize Kay Drey, who has been challenging nuclear power in St. Louis for all of that time. Now, Kay, the footage that we just saw was at a demonstration at the Ameren stockholders meeting in April of 2011. Now, you were inside that meeting, weren't you?
Yes, I
was. What was happening inside where there were people outside?
Well, everyone, when I've gone to these shareholders meetings and I've asked questions every time, I feel as if I'm in some strange world because I want to laugh at things that they don't laugh at, and they laugh at things that I think are horrible. And so everyone's very polite, and Ameren presents all its facts, and people nod in agreement, and they're very supportive. And then the public citizens do get to ask, or the shareholders get to ask questions, and I borrow somebody's ticket, and I get to go. Mm-hmm. And so I always have questions written down, and I start out by saying I have questions that'll last 3 minutes because I don't want them to groan and think, oh, she's going to talk forever. And so I always time what I'm going to say or ask about.
And a few people are sympathetic and a majority are not?
Oh, a majority are not. Everyone thinks, in my case, I'm there to talk about nuclear power. They all think it's wonderful, except maybe a few people.
And so while we might, a whole lot of people say, couldn't we replace nuclear with solar and wind? There's still a whole lot of people with money and power who think that nuclear power is still great, and we really should not forget that.
Right. It's just incredible to me, especially now that we've just been experiencing what's going on in Japan.
Right. Well, okay, let's go back before Japan to 1974. You said you became involved in nuclear issues in 1974, the day that Karen Silkwood, who was Karen Silkwood?
Karen Silkwood worked for a plutonium plant, a plant where they made plutonium fuel, and she found that they were making lots of mistakes, and she reported these. And then she was heading to meet a reporter from the New York Times, David Burnham, and she was run off the road and killed.
Now, it's a movie called Silkwood.
Right, it's a wonderful film.
And so anybody who has Netflix or Blockbuster can order the movie Silkwood and find out what was happening in that conflict.
It was an excellent film.
Now, when you first got involved in the issue in the 1970s, what were your feelings about nuclear power, and what do you think the mood was of most of the people you worked with?
Well, there were a lot of people, a lot of young people in particular, a lot of citizens were very concerned about nuclear power back then even. And Ameren, or at the time Union Electric they were called, wanted to build 2 reactors in Callaway County in the middle of the state.
So in 1974 there were no nuclear reactors in Missouri.
Right, right. And so people expressed concerns. There were a lot of really good people, environmental people. Some people were expressing concerns about the costs, and I guess and then in 1976 we started collecting signatures on a petition to let the citizens of Missouri vote on whether they wanted nuclear power.
Now for some reason we don't have the right to say we don't want nuclear power. It befuddles me why in a democracy the people shouldn't just be able to say we don't want nuclear power. But you had to sort of run around and swerve back and forth and deal with something called CWIP or QUIP. And then the lingo became QUIP and no QUIP. What does CWIP mean?
Okay, it stands for Construction Work in Progress. And this was the Missouri Public Service Commission decided to require the public to start contributing toward the construction costs of a nuclear power plant, 2 reactors actually. And so citizens decided to try to let the public in Missouri, vote on whether or not we should pay in advance for the construction costs of nuclear power.
Now, am I correct that the petition where the signatures were collected, it wasn't specific for nuclear power, was it?
No, it wasn't.
And so if you want to build a solar power plant, you can't pay for that. beforehand, and if you want to build a coal plant, you can't pay for the construction work in progress there. It's just that why is it more devastating for nuclear than any other type of energy?
Well, because nuclear power is very, very expensive. But the lawyer who helped design the wording and that what we would put before the voters, you can't be that specific. So we just said we said power plants. So the construction costs, we would not have to pay the construction costs in advance until the power plant was operable and producing electricity.
Do you remember how much a power plant cost in 1974, 76?
I think they said that to build the Callaway plant, they projected something like $1.5 billion for 2 reactors, and it costs $3 billion, more than $3 billion for 1 reactor.
And so, and in 2011, do you know how much it would go up for
well,
$3 billion?
We hear $8 billion, $11 billion. It's hard to know in different parts of the country.
But the general idea is that when we're told it's going to be such and such an amount for a nuclear power plant, it could easily be twice that amount, couldn't it?
Or 3 times or more.
It could be
absolutely.
be 3 times the amount.
Right.
And so if we if ratepayers sign on to that, then they could be told it's going to be $9 billion, but it could actually be 15, 18, $20 billion.
We just don't. No one would know.
Okay. Well, tell me, in the 1970s, do you remember the movie that came out, The China Syndrome?
Right.
And what is the China Syndrome? What does that phrase mean?
Well, that was how I got involved in this, because my next door neighbor came over one morning, and she said that she had just met an engineer at a party the night before, and he said that they wanted to build a nuclear power plant in Missouri on an area that was a limestone plateau, and limestone has holes in it. And he said, this engineer said, for McDonnell Douglas as it happened, he said, if the water got out of the reactor vessel, I don't know how he described it at the time, the fuel would get hotter and hotter, the uranium fuel get hotter and hotter, and could melt through the bottom of the vessel that was holding the fuel where all the fissioning and power was being generated. And it could melt all the way through the bottom of the reactor vessel and get into the ground and get into the groundwater, and there could be an explosion, a radioactive explosion. And he said, and in fact, they call it the China Syndrome, because the fuel could just keep melting all the way through to China. And she said they call it the China Syndrome. And I said, oh, Loretto, that's just so silly. But it turned out it was. And then, I made a speech on, as it happened, the day Karen Silkwood was run off the road, which was November 13, 1974, to a Missouri. It was like a couple days after Loretto had come over, and she said, Kay, you've got to do something. And she went home. And I've been doing something ever since, reading and learning about it. This film, The China Syndrome, came out, and it was right before the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania.
I remember very well the few weeks between when the film came out and 3 Mile Island happened. Do you remember what they said?
In the film, it said they were talking about this potential accident where the fuel would get so hot and would melt all the way through to China. And they said, and they were saying there could be so much damage from this accident that it could destroy an area the size of Pennsylvania. Not like a week before the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania, we all saw this film, and it said could destroy an area the size of Pennsylvania, and there was no comment. Well, then after I went to see the film again, and when they said it could destroy an area the size of Pennsylvania, the whole audience went, ugh.
Okay. Well, Kay, let's take a break, and we'll come back to talking about 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and Fukushima. Let's take a break for just a few minutes.